Boas tardes.
Boa tarde, consegues ouvir-me?
Oh, good afternoon. Muito bem, muito bem.
Very good. Good afternoon. So we still have a few seconds before we should actually start. So I see you're looking very good. You're looking busy.
I'm at work today. It's supposed to be a quiet night, but unfortunately end up not to be. So yeah, I have a few tables after 8:30, so I should have some fun after this.
Very good, very good. And what will you drink throughout the session?
I'm going to be drinking my favorite tonic from last year. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's from your house. So we're going to have.
For you.
I normally don't go for this kind of wines, but I was quite impressed the quality and the quality of the wine. Say, and I normally don't choose a 30 years old tonic, but this time that
very good. Good choice.
Did excellent work. I normally stick, as you probably know, I stick on the base of 10, or I go to single vintages where I think some of the tonics from single vintage they could be outstanding.
Yeah.
I always have one in memory that I remember from a tasting. That was the Coxburn 69. That for me was a journey.
Very good, very good. All right, so I mean we have only 30 minutes. So before we start, I think it would be relevant to tell people that are following us who I am, the reason why I'm here. So I'm actually head of sales of Symington Family Estates. The reason why I'm actually here is because I've joined the company in 2007, and for most of the time in the company I've been responsible for the UK market. So I've tried to add some value to the port's presence in the market, working together with Paul, with Johnny, with nowadays with Charlotte, with Anthony. And it's been an interesting journey. I think that it would be interesting for people attending that are not that familiar with the UK market to learn a few key stats about the market itself, and the reason why we're talking about the UK here, which is obvious for many, but probably not for everyone. So the UK last year was the fourth biggest market for port in the world in volume, the third biggest market in value. It's been fairly consistent, very resilient. It has had difficult periods, and it always has managed to remain relevant. And it's a market that represents annually something between 900,000 to about 1 million 9-liter cases. I mean, having said that, it's a market that is highly seasonal. Most people will realize this. So it's very, very linked to the Christmas tradition in the UK, extremely seasonal. So I would say that in the last couple of months, we probably sell about 50% of the entire volume throughout the year. But having said this, it's a market that remains very relevant throughout the rest of the year. So, today, the UK will be the fifth biggest world market, even if it's that seasonal. But without any further delay, we're here to host in a School of Port session someone that has a lot of experience dealing with ports in the UK trade, and therefore is someone that has a lot to say about the relevance of ports in the UK market. So, André, I think that the best is for you to introduce yourself and what your trajectory in the UK has been so far.
So basically, as a lot of people know, I'm originally from Portugal. Until I arrived in the UK in early 2000s, my wine knowledge was basic restaurant manager, white, red, rosé, and very much of that. Was really when I arrived in the early 2000s in the UK, I really started getting in the wine world. And it was really from the joining one of the probably largest members clubs in the world, the Royal Automobile Club, where really my knowledge in wine took to grips, and I came across the famous Clublands, that very unique from the British market and from the UK in specific. Basically, I was there for over 7 years, and I start from the basics and work all my way. When I left, I was cellar master, so I was in charge of running all the beverage operations in Woodcote Park. That is the country club the RAC have in Epsom, and I was co-assisting the beverage manager at the time to purchase Philander. Say quite big shoes to fill. I left after 7 years. I was for a short time. I work in a 5-star hotel with a Michelin star with a famous British chef, William Jarvis. So probably one of the souls of the British cuisine, as I like to say. Unfortunately, down to the ownership, the project was stopped half the way through, and after that, I joined where I am today. So just short of 5 years, another members club for coincidence, and I stand there, being here, very happy. Part of my tragedy, I did join a couple of the big international wine judging competition. So I've been judging for over 5 years the International Wine Challenge, being just under 5 years judging the Sommelier Wine Awards, probably one of the most important wine competitions for on-trade wines. So literally judged by sommeliers, head sommeliers, and the people under that banner. And in the last 2 years, I probably joined one of the new up-and-coming wine competitions. There is called London Wine Competition, more focused on the as a package as a wine. Yeah, it's me. Very simple.
Very good. I remember at the time we met at the RAC, and we were, internally we were trying to find the best way to chill a 4.5 liter Tony bottle, and we were after this solution and that. And when I met you that evening, you had found a solution. You had this most amazing swimming pool where the big bottle was laying down and chilling to perfection. So I think that we don't have much time, and I think that I've selected here a number of topics that I think would be relevant to have a talk with you about. In your experience, I mean, how often and when do you serve port? How relevant is port in your daily job?
In my specific daily job, I need to say again, I work in a different environment than the day-by-day restaurants and hotels operations across London. I mean, Clubland, and as most of the people know, Clubland is predominantly port sits at the table very regular. Doesn't matter if it's lunch, less at lunch these days, but it's still significant as you come to the end of the week. Really, the evenings, a glass of port, or finish a meal, go down to the bar and have a glass of port, is still very relevant, where you're not being seen probably on the day-by-day, but for us, still very relevant. And as I say to a lot of people, I have the fortunate to work in this environment where when it comes to banqueting, most of my functions here and some of the functions when I was at the Royal Automobile Club as well, end up with a nice port. And I was also saying to you last night, it's not a lot of sommeliers in the world that have the opportunity to open 24 bottles of Graham's 1985 or Croft 63 or 4 or 5 double magnums of that kind of wines. And I think is a rare insight, because from bottle to bottle, from case to case, you can see the variation and the impact of the cork. So it's extraordinary experience.
But would you be able, in your functions, in your banquets, would you get away with not serving port? So would you run into trouble if you would not serve port, or is it a necessary item to have on that evening?
On the club events is necessary. It's the events we organize is necessary. The chairman's dinner, we do a grouse dinner. A glass of port in the end is part of the tradition, the religion, whatever you want to call it.
That's that's exactly why you're part of this session, because it proves that the relevance is still there in the market. Have you seen throughout these years? I mean, you have experienced a lot of different styles of ports. The wonders of Tony. Have you seen a change in terms of the preferences? In the ports that you serve, Is it just about, is it only just about vintage port, or are things changing in that respect in your experience?
I think but firstly, we very fortunately in London, as we know, everything comes to us as we work in the wine trade, especially sommeliers. And I think, especially in the last 15 to 10 years, you see a rise in tawny ports. And I think one of the things that I think is wrong is the perception that vintage port is seen as you have your first glass is a very alcoholic wine. That is the description of most of the people, and I think they all come down to the arrow. It's how it gets served and how you serve it. And I think a vintage port in that category, late bottle vintage or even ruby, should be chilled before service. And I mean, when I say chilled, should be coming out of your red wine fridges at 14 degrees, not at the room temperature, and being served directly from there. Because leave it on the trolley all evening in the side of the corner of the dining room and come around with the trolley with a nice vintage port on it. You taste it, and the first thing you get is not a lovely bouquet of the fruit, but you get really this alcoholic, intense nose. And this is what put people off out of the vintage port. Through the years, I did the experience of serving both ways, and I think that the bring at a cool temperature to the table give the opportunity for the person who's enjoying their glass of port to enjoy the journey.
Yeah, it shows. Yeah, the temperature of service for port is extremely important, and
especially for vintage is wrong. I think especially for vintage, it's an LBVs, that kind of category. I think with a tawny you can get away with it, even not because it will not show as much as the intensity of the alcohol. But I think with late bottle vintage and vintage port, I think is a definitely must.
Yeah. But it's quite interesting what you're saying, because picking on my own experience, if you asked me, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, what's your favorite style of port, I would definitely say an aged tawny, Colheita, a blend. But maybe because I was drinking tawnies chilled, I then started trying to drink vintage port slightly chilled. And if you ask me today, what's your preference? It's definitely on the ruby, premium ruby side, on vintage port, LBVs, etc. But because I started serving them slightly chilled, which is very, very interesting. And it says a lot about how important the temperature of service actually is. I mean, picking on that, you also worked in a slightly different environment. You worked in a very famous restaurant in London. In a restaurant environment, how do you see port's performance nowadays in the UK? I mean, how often would people come to the restaurant and ask for a bottle of port or open a vintage port bottle?
I think it's still quite relevant, especially in London, especially on the most classic restaurants and the Michelin stars. As we know, London is one of the capitals of the world in domination of Michelins. And I think, especially in the last 10 years, the rising of port again. And I think the training coming in action with the head sommeliers, and they want to know more and learn more about it. It really took an impact. I remember the Christmas I did at the St. James. It's a very small restaurant, one Michelin star. But I remember that, if my memory is not wrong, I did about 4 or 5 magnums, say the large formats of the 1972 tawny. And every time I walk in the room with a bottle, everyone stops. The air doesn't move, and everyone is like, "What is that? I want it." And basically, I think was quite good, not just from the Symington, but the other port families as well, and business bring large formats, because I think brings the relevant to the port is a bit of a show off. And as we know, anything that is different on the restaurant environment, everyone want to taste it, everyone want to know about it. And I think was part of the trend of special tawnies being so relevant was the introduction of that package. I think that took a little effect, especially in London, and I believe around the world, for the conversation I have with colleagues. That makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to a different topic, I have bad news for you. So you've been laying down throughout this session. I started in the same note, so you have to put your phone vertically because you're actually laying down.
Oh, fantastic.
Well,
Is that better now? Hold on, hold on.
this would give a great joke, but I'm not going to say it.
Why not?
Okay. Just one.
Better now.
No, it's much better. I think there's something really interesting that is happening nowadays, which is obviously a bit impacted by the situation we're all living in. But the popularity of Portugal as a touristic destination. So the number of people that have come to this country and to Porto, to Lisbon, to the Douro, and have tried port. And because of that, the performance of port as a category in Portugal exploded. I mean, it's a very important market nowadays. So how can we, as an industry, as the port industry, how do you think we can make the most out of that popularity of Portugal as a destination, and assuring that when Brits come to Portugal and go back to the UK, they will ask for a glass of port, they will buy a port bottle. So what do you think is the greatest challenge for us to make the most out of that?
I think the first thing, and I think that in certain points you're totally right, that people come back from holidays and ask for wines. They taste. I had a Premier League example. I had a member that was in Portugal late last year, and with the situation of the coronavirus, I did set up in the club a small wine club that is basically for my members. And basically, I got 2 pictures on email and say, Andrew, can you source these wines for me? And of course I could. They were available in the UK, but again, people doesn't see. I think one of the biggest problems is a lot of people found things in Portugal they don't find in this country. And I think the relevance of the port in Lisbon and all these wine centers and these educations is what you showing there need to be exported. It's not showing one thing there and bring another thing to the external market. That is probably the first challenge. I think the second challenge is the demystification. I think a lot of people still have in perception that port is an old man drink. And I think with the introduction of the new brands and kind of putting a twist on the old brands as well is breaking that down. That will be my second point. And I think the biggest challenge...
Can I throw a curveball there? Can I...
Please.
Would you serve a port and tonic in your club, as part of a function? How would the members of your club see port being served as a cocktail, as a port and tonic in a function?
Do you like to join me downstairs on my bar to have a fine white port and tonic? Yes, we do have functions with white port and tonic, João.
And how do members of the club react?
Very well. The first time when I arrived, that was requested to me when I arrived. We didn't have white port when I arrived. And I was being requested by someone to, Andrea, will be possible? I said, of course it is possible. And since then, since the last under 5 years, if there's request for a function, a white port and tonic is available. If you go down to the club bar, a white port and tonic is available across the year. So it's not something that is. And one of the things I can tell you, last month, the month of June, my mixed case that I prepared for my wine club was a bottle of white port that I recommend to be served as an aperitif, as a white tonic and tonic, or with a light summer dessert as well. So the versatility of a white port can be used both ways. Say yes is a yes answer to you. Yeah. But I think going back to the previous answer, João, I think the biggest challenge is the demystification, as I said, from port, and the second thing is make port more accessible. And I think if we go down where probably the volume is, it's across the high street bars, the high street pubs, the high street restaurants, port be more widely available and be served with the right conditions. Because if you have a bottle of LBV on the back of the pub open for 5 or 6 days, I have a LBV back in Porto where I really enjoy it. And I go to a pub and ask the LBV and I'm going, it's the same thing, but it doesn't taste exactly the same. I'm not having it again. And basically, I think it's going back to the distributors in the UK, and not just the UK, across the world, to make sure that it's served and kept at the right conditions. I think that is the most important thing, because if I have a lovely experience in Lisbon, in Porto, whatever you go in Portugal, and I really enjoy a nice tasting of ports, and I come back to the UK and my local pub have exactly the same port, but it's been at the back of the bar open for 5 or 6 days, it's not going to be a nice experience. And all the investment that is being made in national land is going to be lost internationally.
So would you agree that the investment that would be probably most worthwhile to do in the UK is about education of the people that actually serve the wine? You know, how do you think that could actually be solved if we see port being, you know, remaining open for months and not served in proper conditions? You know, what do you think should be the biggest focus? I would probably think that what we're doing here tonight, you know, School of Port is obviously a way of doing it. But in terms of the UK market specifically, what do you think would be the best route to follow?
João, I look at this 2 ways. I think one of the ways is you don't need more train at the senior level. I think all the trainings that's been provided across the year in the UK for the top end of the market, you want to call it, people like myself and kind of sommeliers around the country. I think the training is at the low level, where it needs to be very simple, very clear how to serve it, how to keep it. And I think the other thing that probably is putting it back to the producers, like yourselves, it's downsizing the bottles when they go for on trade. A 50 cl bottle or half a bottle, and encourage the special. I'm not saying on the tawny so much, because as you know, tawny is very resilient. It's encourage the bar chains, the local restaurants, the people who doesn't have the volume to sell a bottle of LBV or vintage port in 1 or 2 days, to go for the smaller scale, but offer the right quality. Do you understand what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting because I think most port producers have probably at some stage tried that solution, probably in the best way, probably not in the best way, I mean. So I would agree with you. But the reality is that most producers have probably tried to work with smaller formats, smaller capacities. And there is some reason that we never fully understood which one that takes the consumer not to follow. And obviously, this is very much about an off-trade experience. So I think that your suggestion from a non-trade experience would be, I think, something really interesting. But it's interesting how people react to us not so positively to a smaller format bottle of port wine. But it's an interesting observation, I would say, and it's definitely a good suggestion in the future. I mean, I think that, you know, it would be interesting to hear from you in terms of the next 10, 20 years. You know, I know you're someone that is extremely attentive to, you know, to the future and to what strategic changes could happen in categories that would lead to good or bad results. So in your opinion, what are the biggest opportunities and the biggest threats for port in the UK in the next 10, 20 years?
I think let's going to go look at this in two different channels. I think if we look at the tawny ports, I don't think there's enough reserve wines in Portugal to keep up with the demand. That's my first thing. I think down the line you will see more and more premium prices in certain things that at the present I think the great value for money, and I can enjoy it not every day but regular, and I think in 10-20 years time I'll be struggle to enjoy a nice bottle of tawny port at the top end because it's going to be rare with the demand of the world. As we know, UK and America taking a big lead on the tawny. The other channel will be the vintage port. As we know, vintage port productions, I normally give this example to my members, early 80s, 16, 17,000 cases a year. As we speak, João, 5, 6, 7,000 cases, say half the production. Is more people drinking port in the world. The price is going premium, say. I think in the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be a struggle for you to get a proper vintage port affordable.
Because, yeah, so if you see the price of vintage port going up, how
Yes.
do you see the future and relevance of that specific category?
I think the future is going to be, for me, as what's going to cover the gap is going to be the single quintas. I think I normally, my experience and what I normally say to people when they talk, oh, I have this lovely Grahams or this lovely Sediments or this lovely Taylor's vintage, amazing. You can really feel the terroir. And I say, yes, you're right, but reality, you don't feel the terroir in the vintage port. I think the terroir is you feel on the single quintas because they will give you a specific side of the door with a specific microclimate, with a specific soil. And I normally say the best experience for you to understand port and all the journey of the river is
terroir. Yeah.
The terroir. But the terroir is a combination. If we go down that route, we have a big discussion here for hours.
Absolutely.
I think the terroir is a combination of two things. It's the soil, but the climate around it as well. And I always say, if you start from the one side of the river, from Baixo Corvo all the way to Douro Superior, and I put a couple of numbers of quintas that I had a chance to try individual vintage of that quintas. You can feel what the terroir of the Douro is.
Absolutely.
And I think that you get more that than you get in the vintage ports is a category on in itself. It's a combination of amazing vintage, the right conditions, with amazing winemaking skills, all in one package. Where single quintas is the expression of the year of that single particular site. And I think if you start, what I'll say to people, if you start and you have a chance to buy this 8 bottles that I'm going to say from all the same vintage or very similar, and you sit the 8 classes in your front, will be a journey. You start on Baixo Corvo with Quinta da Pacheca, you go to Quinta do Seixo. A very specific region is Bonfim and Quinta da Rueda from Croft, because they in the both side of the river, but totally different expositions. And there it's really interesting if you compare them both next to each other. You go down to Malvedos and you move down to Vargelas, Senhora da Ribeirinha, and you finish in Valmião, that is Douro Superior, hot baking. And you go back and you put a Pacheco and a Valmião next together, and you're like, oh my God. And I think this is the expression of the Douro on its best. It's the single quintas, you get the terroir, you understand. And from there, you probably will understand more the vintage port down the line as the premium package with amazing winemaker, the right conditions. So I see the future of port being more single quintas being as a domination of the market, vintage port going premium, and Tony ports, the basic, the 10 years old, the 20 years old, being accessible, but as you go up the ladder, 30, 40, and single years, I think we'll go to premium to super premium prices.
I totally agree with you. I think that, accepting the responsibility for that, because we all, as producers, we all have a responsibility. I think the true story of the terroir, the collection of terroirs that the Douro represents, is yet to be told. And I think we all have a responsibility to tell that story in a much better way through the wines. And single quinta wines are a fantastic vehicle to tell that story. Okay, as I suspected, this was going to go very fast. So we only have a couple of minutes, and I threw many topics to you. I'll leave it to you now. What would you like to discuss at the end? What would you like to say or to discuss that hasn't yet been discussed in this session? And it cannot be football, as you know. So
the thing is, as a lot of my friends who know me and colleagues of the trade know me, I'm probably one of the highest critics of Portuguese wines because, as I said, my wine education is all London-based. Say, what I know about wines I learn in London. Say, I'll be the highest critic of Portugal, but I'll be the highest saying how great they are. And I think they're doing an amazing job in a lot of things, on the port in specific top. But I think I feel a feeling of scaredness or afraid to impose the quality of their wines and the right prices. And I think we have a couple of examples yourselves at the Symington, Flaggate with Taylor's, and Nick from Newport, that he put Newport. Sorry, you guys put a couple of super premium wines outside, and as we know, super premium wines they normally go for collectors, and it's really hard for me to understand that I can have at home a bottle of cognac that's probably worth about £400-500, and I have a bottle of vintage port from the same year that was £100. The cost of making a port is probably more expensive. The aging process very similar, and I don't understand where is the problem on the producers to create this unique, and the market demands that, but it's not understood yet. Why not? And for me, working in London, as we know, is one of the kind of the capitals of the wine world, if you want to call it. I look at three vintage ports that I always look at. I pin top of the vintage ports. I look at Quinta do Noval Nacional. I look at Croft, Sirocco, and I look at Graham's Stone Terraces, and their wines, they from the other world. You know, they wines. I had the opportunity to trade the 2017, the 3 wines on the row after each other, and I tell you, I was transported to a totally different level. But they still worse than a third grower claret.
So do you think that you've mentioned 2 very, relatively recent releases from 2 producers? Do you think, and those releases are positioned at a higher price point, at much smaller volume releases than the main vintages produced by those houses? But do you still see the opportunity for the extremely small releases of vintage port to be fetching even higher prices than that?
I think there's a demand on the market for that, and if people doesn't see it, it's because they want to see it. I say it again. You look at I'll give a good example that I gave to you last night. A couple of years ago, I was dining with a great gentleman, and I think probably is one of the legends of the wine world, Mr. Miguel Torres in London. And I asked him a question. Mr. Torres, why your Masla Plana still so affordable? Thank for me, because I can drink it every day. The other way around is impossible. And he said, Andrew, because it's what the markets pay. And I turn around to him and say, Mr. Torres, in half of the time the Masla Plana is made, there was a little estate in Ribera del Douro called Domaine de Pingos, who came in and went to super premium prices, and they didn't have a problem to sell the wines there. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. Flor de Pingos, Domaine de Pingos, still super premium. Masla Plana, I probably went up about £15. Say, I don't understand, especially when companies are a certain size, the problem of imposing themselves in the market. Should be even easy than this small super premium wineries, because they work the cost and say, this, we're going to put it in the market and we're going to sell it, and that's it. It's not another choice. So it's really hard for me to understand what's the mentality behind of your organization, behind of the other port organization. I think probably if we name 4 of the biggest companies of port, is really, really hard for me to understand what's the problem of putting in extra zeros behind of the numbers sometimes. Because as well, we'll bring some relative to the category, because at the present, port still seen as a commodity and affordable, even at the top end, where it shouldn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're all very privileged. I've seen a comment in the session by Robert saying that he's very happy to be able to pay what he's paying for these wines. But it is true that myself, I'm drinking a 20-year-old vintage port that is showing perfect integration, refined tannins, and the cost of this bottle next to what other categories could aim for on a 20-year-old wine is extremely affordable. So I think that I think us as producers and as an industry, we have to show the confidence about positioning our wines where they should be positioned, because the quality of what's in the glass, I think we all have, and we have all seen the reactions we've poured. I mean, in 14 years, I've poured thousands of glasses, and we've all seen the reactions by everyone. And I think that it's just a matter of passing that confidence of what's in the glass to the market, and being proud of these wines that are produced with so much care, with such a high cost. I would like to, I think we're already quite late. So some people might find it extremely odd to discuss the relevance of the port of the UK markets for port in 30 minutes. Obviously, it would take us 5 days to discuss this topic. But I think this is actually a fantastic start. I must say, on a final personal note, that André is one of the most impressive professionals that I've met in the industry, and I just seeing him in action, which I had the opportunity to see a couple of times, it's really impressive. And for me, it's a privilege to have hosted a session with you. And I would like to thank you for your participation in the School of Port session. And if you have any ideas for a future 30-minute session, this time both of us standing up, because we were both laying down in the beginning.
Yes, definitely. I'll make sure that doesn't happen again.
Just throw them. And thank you very much. And I don't know if you want to say what.
On my side, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to kind of join you for 30 minutes. Hopefully, we'll be much longer if we could. As we know, every time we speak, it's a long time. But it was a pleasure, and keep drinking port.
Oh yeah, let's do a chin chin, chin chin,
Chin
chin chin. Cheers. Ciao. Bye bye.
Ciao.
Bye.